Welcome, folksy folks. Welcome to Fabric of Folklore. I'm your hostess, Vanessa Y. Rogers, and this is the podcast where we unravel the mysteries of folklore. This show is all about exploring the world of mythology, folk tales, fairy tales, and oral storytelling. Folklore is the expression of humans creating meaning from their world. I came across a folklore quote the other day by an American author and occasional illustrator of children's books. Her name is Nancy Willard. You might know her because she won the Newbery Medal in 1982 for A Visit to Williams Blake's Inn. But this is the quote. Armenian folklore has it that 3 apples fell from heaven, one for the teller of a story, one for the listener, and the third for the one who took it to heart. Sorry, that's not the end. What a pity heaven awarded no apple to the one who wrote the story down. So I was really curious about this Armenian phrase, and I found that it's used in a similar fashion to how we say happily ever after at the end of fairy tales. And naively, years back, I thought that all fairy tales in all languages just ended with happily ever after. But in every different country, they have a different way of ending their fairy tales. And in Armenia, they say they have a version of this apple. 3 apples fell from the sky. It's not as ubiquitous, but it's one of the common phrases that's said at the end of fairy tales. And I love this. So that is really what this podcast is about. It's about exploring. It's about celebrating and embracing those differences and similarities and finding those connections in our humanness. So that sounds like a podcast you want to continue to listen to. Hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you are a subscriber, thank you so much. And consider writing us a review because it's so helpful for new podcast listeners to be able to find us. If listeners have given us a 5-star review and or written us a lovely little message. So thank you so much for those who have written us a review. And our show is going to be really fun and exciting today and really appropriate for the summertime. It's all about Walt Disney, the man and his work. And our guest today is Phil Gramlick. Is that how you say your last name? I forgot to ask.
That was really good. That was really good. You did almost got it perfect. It's not, the A is like
okay.
So Gramlick. Yeah, very close.
Perfect. He is the podcast host of Ear to Their Travel and also the author of Walt and His Parks, a curated oral history of fun, interesting stories that shape the people, culture, and the legacy of some of his favorite places on Earth. He was hit with the Walt Disney World bug at the age of 13, and 5 to 6 years later, he became a cast member at the Disney's Animal Kingdom, making magic for guests each and every day, and his love for Disney has continued. So thanks so much, Phil, for joining us on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I like, these are always so much fun to do something that's a little bit different than I'm used to. Talk Disney, but a little bit of a different way. It's awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Well, we were talking about this before we got started, but tell us a little bit about your journey to writing this book.
So really quick, like, do I slouch? Do I not slouch? So you got to like sit back in the seat, right? Excuse me. Thank you for having me. Yeah. So I'm a former cast member like you. I met my wife in Walt Disney World when we were cast members. We got engaged in Walt Disney World. We honeymooned in Disneyland, my first trip at Disneyland. Yeah, we're a Disney family. My youngest daughter took her first trip at 3 months. My twins took their first trip at 6 months. Like, yeah, we're insane. So we were cast members, and then we were dating and my wife and I took a trip to Ireland when we were dating, England and Ireland. And I bought the Bob Thomas. I had known about Walt because I was a cast member. I did, traditions, which is the cast member class that you take to train and learn all about the Disney, the history of the Disney company and Walt. So I had known that. I had a little bit better than the surface level knowledge. Mm-hmm. And we took a trip to Ireland and England, and it rains freaking all the time there. And you see the sights, but you do a lot of reading because you're inside a lot. Like, you're like, okay, that was great. Well, Buckingham Palace, awesome. Let's go inside and get lunch. So my wife and I love talking to each other. We both love to read too. So we brought books. That's the book I bought on that trip. And I read it twice on that trip. We were there for 2 weeks. I read that book twice. And ever since then, I've been hooked. Well, my first trip to Walt Disney World, but then this is what made me very interested in Walt, the person.
So that I remember reading books in different places. I remember reading a memoir to geisha when I was traveling on a train to Switzerland and being really confused, like looking up and realizing I wasn't in Japan. Did you have that experience while you were in Ireland, like being so immersed in your book and like thinking maybe you were in Disney World?
That's really funny. Yeah, maybe. You know what's funny is I have a memory like that, but it's different. I when I was this is way off topic. When I was 19 years old, I worked in a paper mill and or 18 years old, I'm sorry. 18 years old, I worked in a paper mill where my dad worked. My dad was an operating engineer, hard working guy, manual labor almost his whole career. And I
Uh-huh.
did that for one summer and it was awful. But I remember I took a Stephen King book out with me and I worked an overnight shift and I had the book I had was called Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and it's one of Stephen King's short story books.
Uh-huh.
And outside in the dark, pitch black, waiting for these coal trucks to arrive, reading freaking scary horror books. And I'll never forget. I would scare the crap out of myself and get up and run into the building because I was so scared. But yeah, that's so I didn't have that. I don't know if I had that moment in Ireland, but I definitely had that moment reading books. Absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I did, that reminds me, sorry, we're getting off topic, but,
Right.
I
What
did
did I
get to
do?
see on that same trip, I did a study abroad, and so I traveled to see the castle that the Disney castles are built after.
I was
Neufenstein,
going to
I
say,
believe
if
it's.
you're going to ask me to pronounce it, you better forget about it because I can't do
I
that.
think that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah,
I'm probably butchering it. I'm
I think
sorry,
that's right.
Germans.
That's
Um,
Liechtenstein. I think that's exactly right.
in Germany, but it's
Yeah,
so beautiful. Have you seen it?
I've not. I've never been to Germany, even though that's my last name is very German. I've, I've never been. It's definitely on my list. I'm a travel agency owner who hates to fly though, so like maybe I'll get a boat
Uh,
over there sometime.
yeah.
I'd like
How
to
long does
see.
it take for a boat to get across the waters now?
I don't know. I mean, it can't be that long, right? Like, no, we do. My agency, we sell. So Disney has a hard time booking the cruises where they move the ships. So if the ship is going from Port Canaveral in Florida to
Uh-huh.
Dover in England, who wants to take that cruise? Not really guests. So they sell it to people like me who own the
Uh-huh.
travel agency. We get a super low rate, and I can take my family and we get to go. That's how I get to do that. So
Oh.
someday, my
Yeah.
kids. I have a 13-year-old and two 11-year-olds now, so they're very busy with activities after school, all that
Uh-huh.
stuff. So maybe someday.
Well, awesome. Okay, let's get back on
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
subject. Okay, so how did you do your research for this book?
So my podcast was first and foremost. I
Mhm.
started it in 2000. I think it's 16. Excuse me.
Mhm.
Um, and I just started asking. I've read a lot of books. I mean, if you right on the other side of my studio here, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Root beer is the problem. Um, you can diet.
Blame the root beer.
Yeah, you can diet. You get it. But I have like literally like a giant bookshelf full of almost only Walt and Disneyland books. Ever
Oh.
since the first book I told you I bought, I've just been buying them. Whenever a Walt book comes out, I buy it. I read it cover to cover. I'm kind of insane. I might be obsessed. Huh. So
Yes,
then
probably.
yeah, right. When I started the podcast, I did this thing called Word of the Week. I did Word of the Week shows, and I would
Mhm.
go by like a Sesame Street. I would say this week's Word of the Week is brought to you by the letter A. A
Mhm.
for Aladdin, or B for whatever. C for campground, and I would do a whole episode in the Fort Wilderness campground. Um,
Mhm.
that really got me interested in me, like, oh man, let's find out more about this stuff. And
Yeah.
then on ep, and then I was browsing Disney Legends websites, and I was on Rolly Crump's website. Rolly Crump uh, passed away last year, sadly, but lived into his 90s and was just a giant, kind-hearted, just sweet guy,
Mhm.
and just one of Walt's incredible artists. And I was like, this is, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. I saw he had a website. I was looking at his art, and then I saw contact, and I said, oh, what's the worst that's going to happen? He'll say no, right? So I clicked
Yeah.
contact. I wrote a message. Hey, I'm just started a Disney podcast. I would love to talk to Rolly Crump for 15 minutes. What do you think? Now, this is 8 years ago. Podcast. They weren't what they are now, where everybody was
Yeah.
trying podcasts, right? Like there was maybe 30 Disney podcasts at the time. I was one of them. And his wife, Marie, wrote me back within a day and said, we'd love to do it. Yeah. And on a Friday, I dropped my kids off at preschool, and I got in my office, and I'm talking to Rolly Crump for episode 11 of my show, and I had
Wow.
no business talking to Rolly Crump, right? I read his
Yeah.
book. I bought his book and read it cover to cover within the day. Like I was like, all right,
Oh, no.
I got to prepare. I read the whole book, and I was so nervous and so scared. And Rolly he was very hard of hearing at the time. And
Uh-huh.
when we got on the phone, his wife Marie explained to me. She said, "Listen, he can't hear, so you're going to need me for the interview. All right." And she said, "I'll ask him everything you ask him, and then he'll just answer the questions." So she did, and Marie was awesome. I asked for 15 minutes. They gave me 2 hours. We talked for 2 hours, and yeah, that's just one of the stories. Like, you know, it was Bob Gurr, and then it was Julie Andrews, and then it was Floyd Norman. I got to talk to all these incredible Marty Sklar, and just I got to meet them and get their stories. And I mean, if you're nice, he's got to be nice. Nice, ask the nice. And the worst thing they can say is no. It really is. And then I got a million. I told you before we hit
Yeah.
recording, a million no's in the book. I got a million no's in the podcast too. I just expect no's. And if you get a yes, you're like, oh, whoa, I got a
Right.
yes. Yes. So yeah, I hope that answered the question in a
Mhm.
roundabout way.
So you chatted with a lot of people. So Rolly, what was his last name? Crumb?
Crump, yeah, CRUMP.
Who else was significant in Walt's life that was alive to be able to talk with?
Yeah,
Because he how long ago did Walt die?
he died in 1966. I was born in
Oh,
1978,
wow.
so we had a nice little gap between his death and before I was born. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, you you know, the few I talked to, there's still a bunch of folks that are still around that work for him, like Julie
Mhm.
Andrews. I spoke with,
Mhm.
Mary Poppins herself. That was incredible. Bob
Yeah.
Gurr. Bob Gurr is the one who designed the Matterhorn, the monorails, the submarines, the Autopia vehicles. Pretty much, it's been said that if it's on wheels and in Disneyland, Bob Gurr designed it. I reached out to his manager. He was a guy for the first year of my podcast I chased, and I was like, I really got to find Bob Gurr. And I couldn't find his email, and I couldn't find his phone number, and I got really good at tracking down people, which is kind of creepy. I have a funny story about that if you have a second. Let me mute
Yeah.
um, I can tell that in a second, but I'll tell that one in a second. But I think I got pretty good at tracking people down, so I tracked down Bob's manager, and I said, "Listen, will Bob give me 15 minutes to talk on my podcast, and then I'll plug." He's doing a Waltland bus tour. It's a bus around Southern California where it's all kinds of stops that are like important in the history of the life of Walt Disney.
Mhm.
And I said, I'll plug it if he gives me 15 minutes. And his manager wrote me back a half hour later and was like, yeah, Bob said yes. And
Wow.
that led to me and Bob developing a friendship. And I've been friends with Bob for 7 years now. I've been to Bob's house and we've gone to Disneyland together and um, we've, yeah, like insane. We, I had the crazy story. Like I've told this on another podcast, but me and a friend of mine who wanted to meet Bob, and Bob, I called, I said, because he had done my podcast literally dozens of times, and give
Uh-huh.
me hours and hours and hours and hours of material. And I said, Bob, I want to thank you. I'm coming out to Disneyland for an owners summit, a travel agency thing. I said, let me take you out to dinner. Can I take it? Where's around your house? That's because he was in his late 80s at the time. And
Yeah.
I said, where can I take you? And he's like, I'll do my best Bob Gurr impression. And he goes, Phil, don't worry about it. And he goes, just come to the house. We'll get a pizza. We'll have a couple beers in the backyard. So that's what I did. We bought him he was really into Gertinis at the time, which are like, it's a martini, but it's Bob's version. So I bought him a bottle of Bombay gin from the liquor store that was near his house. We went to his house. We ordered a pizza. Bob likes Hawaiian pizza. We got Hawaiian pizza, and we sat in his backyard for 4 hours and watched the sunset. And he told us stories about Walt, just just us, me and a buddy of
Yeah.
mine. He just told us Walt stories, and I wish I could have, but it's rude. You can't be like, "Hey, Bob, can I record this? Can I break out my
Can I just
microphone?"
Yeah.
Like I know we're hanging out, but I'm going to forget all these stories, man. So yeah, I remember like three of them, and I can't tell them here because they're not appropriate ones, but
Oh,
uh, they're ones that he told me that I can tell other fans of his, but I can't tell.
uh-huh.
But yeah, and so then the other ones, I mean, after you get Bob and you get Rolly, when you tell other people, when I told Julie Andrews' agent that I had spoken to those two,
Uh-huh.
yeah, she said yes. So I mean, I could tell you a funny story about every single celebrity I've spoken to, but those are another one. The story I was just alluding to was Richard Sherman of the Sherman Brothers, the famous, Spoonful of Sugar, Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, in the Tiki Tiki
Uh-huh.
Tiki Room. Those songwriters. Richard Sherman is still alive and well in his early 90s. In this room in my studio about 6, 7 years ago, I wanted to find Richard Sherman's phone number so I could call him to invite him to be on my podcast. And I got really, like
Mhm.
I said, yeah, I got really good at internet detective. So I sat here. It was the morning. My kids were little. They were 7 years ago, so they were 6, 7 years old, and they were up, watching Julie's Green Room or something. And I was here in my office, and I started sleuthing, and I found after a lot of researching an address and a phone number, which I believe was Richard Sherman's wife.
Mhm.
And it was in Beverly Hills. And I was like, I'll try. So I picked up my
Mhm.
phone and they called it. And wouldn't you know, nobody answered, but the outgoing message was musically a spoonful of sugar. So I'm
No.
like, okay, I got that. And then Richard Sherman's voice comes in and he goes, "We are out making magic," or something wonderful. And he's like, and his wife is like, "Leave the message after the beep." And I panicked and I hung up the phone. And I realized it was 6:30 in the morning, Pennsylvania time. So I called Richard freaking Sherman's house at 3:30 in the morning, and I'm sure he had caller ID. And the next day, I called him back like a moron, trying to ask him if they would. I mean, the number was disconnected. It was over. So I am the reason. I am the reason why Richard Sherman in Hollywood got a disconnected phone number. That's me.
Oh, no.
Yeah, yeah. I told you this conversation can go everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a fun.
Okay,
That was
well,
a fun one.
why do you think, why do you think that people love Disney movies, Disney World? Like you and your family, you are Disney fanatics. You
Mhm.
go as much as you can, and
Yeah,
you are not alone, right? There are a lot of people who are like you, who really just continue to have such a full heart for Disney. What do you think it is that draws people?
it's it literally is the place where you can leave everything in the hotel room, and not even in the hotel room. You check your problems at when you drive through those giant Walt Disney World gates, the Mickey and Minnie on either side, on right off of I-4, and you drive in and it just weights off your shoulders.
Mhm.
My family, it's like, oh my gosh, we're on vacation. We have nothing to do other than have fun with each other for the next week. That's what it is. I'm big on family. My kids are my favorite people. My wife's my favorite person. So you're going to make me cry while I'm talking myself to myself. But it's true. Like that's what it is for us. It's that
Uh-huh.
everything, especially when, I mean, you walk into Magic Kingdom, or have you been to Disneyland? You walk into Disneyland, right?
I haven't been to Disneyland, only World.
Okay, well, we got to get you there. My phone, you have my phone number and my email. I'll hook you up with one of our agents who will get you there soon because you're missing out. Disneyland Park is the greatest park. It's the greatest theme park on the planet. I was always a Walt Disney World guy first.
Uh-huh.
Moment I stepped foot in Disneyland, I was, oh, I get it. Walt touched everything in here. Like the
Mhm.
fingerprints are still here. It's different. And so that place, especially when you go there, and I do have laryngitis. I think this isn't my voice cracking, but it did crack a little bit. I did tear up a little bit, but it's just a feeling, man. It's just it really is. I can't, I know it's corny. Trust me, I'm 45 years old. I understand how corny that sounds. But if it weren't, Walt Disney believed it. He believed it. That's why I built it, right? So you
Mhm.
really, because of the berm, the railroad tracks around Magic Kingdom, around
Mhm.
Disneyland, you don't see the outside world when you're in those parks. You don't see the outside world in Epcot, except for you see the Tower Terror across the water, which always cracks me up. But you don't see the outside world. You're in Walt Disney World. You can forget about work and your sick aunt in Idaho or whatever it is. It's just total immersion. I love it. And I think the people who are like, it's so crazy because it's so politically divided now, right? Like people on the left,
Mhm.
people on the right. I try to stay out of politics. I really do.
Yeah.
Um, they've made Walt Disney World and Disneyland and the Disney company such a political thing, and it drives
Mhm.
me nuts. Uh, but if they would just go and enjoy it the way it's supposed to be enjoyed, I
Mhm.
think everybody would have a different. It's is it as cheap as it was in the 70s? Is it as cheap as it was in the 50s or the 90s? No, it's not. It's expensive.
Mhm.
It went up, way up during COVID, and it hasn't come down. And people
Yeah.
keep asking me when it's going to come down. I wish I could tell you. I can't. And if I didn't,
Mhm.
if I wasn't making a little money as an entrepreneur and wasn't in like the higher middle, I probably couldn't afford to take my kids.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. I understand it's a luxury vacation. It stinks, but I think it's a worthwhile one. So save for it if you have to. I really do. I really think so. So hopefully that answered that.
Yeah. One of the things I was struck with when I was a cast member at Disney World was how much attention to detail was put in
Mhm.
Disney. And you see that, and it, it's more to the extreme than in any other theme park I've ever been to. Like, I don't know if this is the same as at Disneyland, but there's the no fly zone over Disney World. Is that the same at Disneyland?
Yeah. I mean, everything you think about Walt Disney World and how special it is, multiply it by 6,000. And that's Disneyland Park.
Mm.
Like it's that quaint. It's that I always mess up this quote, so I want to mess it up again, but I want to do my best. Rolly Crump, who I was talking about earlier, said he was famously didn't like Walt Disney World. He only liked Disneyland. He got to be a bit of a curmudgeon in his late years, but he didn't mean it like that. He
Yeah.
said, "You come to Disneyland, it's a beautiful salad. There's croutons and there's dressing and there's vegetables and there's radishes and there's tomatoes and there's lettuce." And he said, "All the other parks, just lettuce and tomatoes. That's all it is." And the way he said it, I'm like, "Oh, I get it. It's Walt's Park. It's also the
Hmm.
park locals go, right?" So like it stands out to me how different and impressive it is because I'm there twice a year. People come every day. There's this guy that
Hmm.
sits on one of the porches in Disneyland. His name is Frank. I found. I'm not a Disneyland everyday guy, so I didn't know about him before.
Yeah.
Frank is known as the I'm trying to the porch something porch bum something like that. I forget his nickname. Frank. I'm sorry if you hear this. He is like he's a Disneyland guy. It's his thing. He doesn't work there, but he's there every day. He
Uh
goes
huh.
every morning. He has his coffee. He does his walk. Whatever he does, he sits on his bench on the porch. Nobody touches his spot because they know Frank's coming. It's different,
Right.
and it's unique, and it's you'll get that feeling when you go, even with the latest editions, even with Galaxy's Edge, with Star Wars Land, even with like the new technology and the magic bands, and you don't need cash to go to the parks anymore. Even with all that stuff, it's still Walt's Park. Still feels very much like Walt's Park, and that's why I wrote the book. I want people to know about Walt first as the guy that he was, and I think there's a lot of
Hmm.
nonsense out there about who he was, and that drives me nuts. I want them to
Hmm.
know that. I want them to remember that, and I want them to know about like the creation of the park. Like it was a monumental thing to get that
Hmm.
done in a year. 1954 construction started. Almost a year later, they opened. A year. It took like 4 years to get Galaxy's Edge built, and it's a land. Like seriously, it's remarkable. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
hoping. Somebody told me recently, and it's the coolest. This is and my ego couldn't get bigger. This is the coolest compliment I've gotten. Somebody said, "Your book makes me feel like Disneyland makes me feel," and I was like, "Holy cow, that's it's a it's crazy." So like, wow, what a compliment that was. It was so cool. Excuse me, I'm gonna keep going back
Yeah.
to
What a high order compliment.
it is, and I apologize. I keep going back to getting over this bug that my lovely children gave me, and I've been coughing my face off. So
Yes.
I'm on Mucinex. My voice is almost gone, but I'm getting through it.
um, okay, so tell us about Walt's upbringing. He had a pretty, it was idyllic, but also stark.
Yeah, I think it's that's a good way to put it. Actually, I'm going to write that down. It was. He born in Chicago, in a house his dad built with his own two hands. His dad was
Wow.
a carpenter. His mom designed the house. Actually, his mom drew the plans. His mom was very intelligent, school teacher.
Yeah.
Before Walt was born, that's actually how Elias and Flora met. Elias was a substitute teacher. He was doing anything he could to make some money.
Yeah.
And Flora was like 8 years younger than him, and she was teaching, or she was a student, and she grad. It's kind of a little weird about the timeline, but listen, it was like 1918 something, right? So who are we to judge? But
Right.
but yeah, he had in Chicago, his very early years, 4 or 5 years old, he had no memory of those years. Walt's dad, Elias, thought that the crime was getting pretty dicey in Chicago
Mm,
by around 1905. Or I can't, I'm not good with dates, 04 or 05. Moved the
mhm,
family to Marceline, Missouri. They bought a farm. Um, and that was where Walt's entire childhood was made. On that farm in Marceline, he stayed there. He was gone before he was 10. I believe that's right. Again, please don't quote me on the dates or ages. I just know that how long he was there. Um, yeah, and it was if you look at the movie's so dear to my heart. If you look at the old Mickey Mouse shorts where he's on a farm, playing crazy, Steamboat Willie, it's
uh-huh,
a very Mark Twain-esque kind of feel.
mhm,
That was Walt's childhood when he was in Marceline. Yeah, his dad was a taskmaster. His dad made him do chores every single day, every day. But his
mhm,
mom really early on, like 4 or 5, noticed that he had a passion for drawing and for art, and she encouraged him. And she would
mhm,
help him. She would organize his day so that he would be finished with all of his chores in the morning. So that then he would have the
mhm,
rest of the day to wander the farm with a sketch pad that his aunt gave him and draw. And him and
mhm,
his sister would draw, and that was that those 4 or 5 years in the farm, 5 years in the farm, are what kind of made him the dreamer I think that he was. Then he
mhm,
moved to Kansas City, and it was brutal. I mean, he was 9 years old, 10 years old. His dad was waking him up at 3 o'clock in the morning, rain, snow, with that hot weather, 90 degrees. It was somebody did the research, and I don't know who it was, because Walt talked about how when he was a kid, I think 9 or 10 years old, how the snowdrifts in Kansas City were over his head, and his dad would still wake him up and he would have to deliver 100, 200 newspapers every morning, and then have to do it again in the afternoon. His
mhm,
dad owned a route, so we had boys deliver the papers,
mhm,
and he get paid a nickel, not a dime. And the researcher that looked into it said, yeah, like his Walt's excuse me, Walt's 11th year or 10th year, they really Kansas City really did have snowdrifts that high. Like they were that bad. And he would one of my favorite stories about him when he was a kid, he loved the apartment buildings because he would really fast go deliver all the newspapers in the apartment building, and it was warm
mhm,
inside, of course it was heated, and he would just
mhm.
nap under the stairwell. He would lay under the stairwell and sleep for a half hour. Sometimes he would go late for school, because he would be frozen outside delivering 100, 200 newspapers.
Yeah,
That wasn't an exaggeration. That was all true. So
uh-huh,
his dad was abusive. His dad, Elias, for today's standards, 2024, like, I don't know about you, I wouldn't hit my
yeah,
children, but that was a regular thing he did to Walt. And Walt's older brothers, he would hit him, he would beat him with the back of a hammer, he would smack him across the room, and they said the wrong thing. He wasn't kind. Um,
mhm,
Walt, it was weird. Like in all the research I've done, spoke glowingly about his dad his whole life. Not one bad word about him. Just adored him and said, he made him tough. That's how a Midwestern dad in 1910. I'm glad that wasn't me.
yeah,
I'm for sure. I mean, I was pretty soft growing up. My parents signed me up for Cub Scouts. I wasn't out there working the farm, you know.
yeah. I mean, it made me think when, I was reading that part in the book, how Elias was so serious and didn't appreciate practical jokes. He didn't laugh or smile, it didn't seem. Um, and I wondered if that was his wanting to create the happiest place on earth was almost in reaction to his father's seriousness.
Yeah.
Did you have a take on that?
I think you hit the nail right in the head. I think he wasn't allowed to be a kid when he was a kid. Like he was in Marceline, right? But
Mhm,
that stopped in Kansas City. He was no toys. His dad didn't believe in buying him toys. His brother Roy bought him a top one year, like a gyroscopic top, and
mhm,
that was his toy. That's what he played with, and that was what he had. Um, his dad didn't believe in spending money on anything that didn't better his education. So if
mhm,
it wasn't learning an instrument, he wanted him to learn the fiddle, the violin. Elias was an excellent fiddle player. Would go into town in Marceline and bring home vagabonds who played guitar, and they would give him a meal, and they would sit on a Disney family porch at the farm in Marceline and play music all night. And Walt and his brothers and his sister would go out there and listen to them. And, and that's the kind of guy Elias was. He was like a devout, like Christian, like help your fellow man, but your kid is going to work and your kid's going to
Mhm.
make some of him. I'm sorry, I mumbled there. Your kid's going to make something of himself and your kid's going to be better than his parents. And that's what he believed. So
Mhm.
he succeeded, I think, in a lot of ways
Mhm.
in that.
And
But
I mean, you described him as a serial entrepreneur,
mm,
Elias.
yeah, so when Walt was born, he was working, not when Walt was born, yeah, around then, he was working on the Chicago World's Fair as a carpenter. And
Mhm.
then he went and bought the farm after that when they moved to Marceline. And his source of income was the farm. And he was and then later in life, he bought investment in a jelly factory and he tried to, like, he tried to run be an investor and a higher up in a jelly factory and just buy into that. And that didn't work. And
Mhm.
he was always had the next, like he was, he worked as a carpenter in Chicago, building houses just like the one he built for himself. He was always working for himself as a teacher, trying to become, when he was a kid, more and more keep coming out of my head now. When he was a kid, him and his father tried to run I believe it was an orange grove, an orange farm in Florida. Um,
Mm.
Elias lived in Florida for a while, like when he was before Walt ever was born. So
Mhm.
I think that's right. Someone will have to fact check me on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Um, but yeah, he had just a string of failures. He wanted Walt to work for somebody else. And I think Walt learned, like, it's funny, Walt learned how to be an entrepreneur from his dad, or at least
Yeah.
how not to be one. Like
Right.
he, like, dude, that guy persevered like nobody I've ever read about in my life. And, I think that was right. I think you're right on by saying he didn't get toys. He didn't get the train. He loved like famously loved the railroad, the toy railroad. Didn't get one until he was an adult. He was in his 30s or 40s and he got one. And he wrote to his sister Ruth a Christmas letter and said, "You're going to make fun of me." This is a paraphrase, of course, but he said, "You're going to make fun of me, but I know I'm in my 30s, but I bought a train set for myself and I set it up at the studio. Not the one that he ended up building in his backyard, a small one." And he
Mhm.
said, it's my stress relief. I go and I play with it. And he had miniatures in his office. He collected miniatures and he played with those. He was a 40, 50, 60-year-old man playing with toys. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think he didn't get to do it when he was a kid. Disneyland was his toy. That's what he built. He built
Mhm.
it to go play on trains. He literally, a little girl got hurt on his train in his backyard and he couldn't regulate it because he wasn't there a lot because he was making movies all over the world.
Uh-huh.
So when he wasn't there, a little girl got hurt on his train at his house in his backyard. And he told people at the studio, box it up, put it in storage. We can't do it anymore. And and like 2 years later, he was building Disneyland. He wanted his train, so we just built an entire theme
Yeah.
park so he could drive his train. Like it's insane. It's not that simple, but it kind of is. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're that successful and I don't know, his batting average, Bob Gurr always tells me his batting average was like 950. Like the guy just never he didn't make bad decisions. He just didn't. Not in his correct, not in his personal life, sure, but not in his career. He was just not once he got established. Early on, tons of
Mhm.
mistakes. But once he got established.
Can you give us some examples of some of his early failures?
Yeah, like so I don't know if you know the name of iWorks when he in around 1921, 22, I think it is. He
Mhm.
met Ub Iwerks working in Kansas City for the Kansas City Slide Company. Ub Iwerks ended up becoming the creator of Mickey Mouse. Basically, he was the first one that drew Mickey Mouse. He and Ub went into business together, early 20s, and they called their company. They wanted to call it Disney Iwerks, but then they
Mhm.
thought that sounded like an optometrist, so they changed it to Iwerks Disney. And
Yeah.
that company went. They didn't know what they were doing. It went bankrupt in a few months. Walt started. Uh, he started doing Laugh-O-Gram in Kansas City, uh,
Mhm.
and had this is my favorite story. I don't know the numbers. I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was like he had no money, he had no job. He was literally living in his family's house in Kansas City.
Mhm.
Um, he somehow convinced backers to give him $15,000 to start Laugh-O-Gram Studio and make his first film. $15,000. I think it's like 200 plus $1,000 in today's.
Wow.
He was a kid. He was 20, 19, 20 years old. How did he do
Mhm.
that? Like I that fascinates me. He was maybe the best salesman ever. It's like
Mhm.
I imagine like Walt as like Don Draper from Mad Men, like walking into the room. I don't know if that's how it
Mhm.
was, but But then like Laugh-O-Gram, he has that go for a while. He didn't when he signed his contracts, he didn't figure in his costs at all. He
Mhm.
just figured in what it would cost for, I guess, I don't even know what it was. He miscalculated his cost, and he ended up losing money on every Laugh-O-Gram cartoon he made. Until the
Mm.
end, then he made Tommy Tucker's Tooth and ended up making a little bit of money on it. But
Mhm.
sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. But he's I can't believe he's been this quiet so far. Uh, but yeah, but Laugh-O-Gram goes bankrupt. He literally had to sell everything he had because he couldn't make a profit. And instead of all he was able to keep was his camera that he had before he started Laugh-O-Gram and his unfinished reel of a movie called Alice's Wonderland, and starring Virginia Davis.
Mhm.
And he my favorite part about the story is instead of like going, all right, well, I lost. I'm going to go back to living with my parents in Chicago.
Yeah.
He buys a one-way ticket to Los Angeles, one way, no return ticket, first class. He's got $40 to his name, and that's it. He sells his camera. Excuse me. Let me hit the mute button really quickly. Sorry, too much talking.
That's okay.
He, he sells his. He literally took. He bought a one-way first class ticket, even though he couldn't afford it, to Los Angeles. No job, no prospects, nothing, and that's his confidence level. I love it. I love. There's a
Mhm.
statue of him and Mickey in Disney California Adventure. It's called Suitcase and a Dream. And it's Walt at 20 years old, 21 years old, with a big fedora and a tie and a mismatched clothes and a giant trunk. And it's like, and it's Mickey Mouse standing on top of it, which I love. But I love that. It's my favorite part of the story. Like he just bet on himself, and then he failed out in California. Like he invents Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and Oswald's a huge star in
Mhm.
1927. Huge, biggest star in the world. And he thinks he's due for a raise. I'm like, I'm killing it. I'm going to go to New York, talk to the producer of Oswald, and say I want a raise. Like I'm not making enough money on this.
Yeah.
And I go to this guy Charles Mintz, who's the producer at Universal, and says, it's a couple different meetings. It's not just one meeting. It's they met each other all week. And but Mintz tells him, I'm not going to give you a raise. Not only that, you're going to take a pay cut. And Walt's like, no, I'm not. And he said, well, you are, because I also hired away all of your animators, all of them. And it was true. Only two of Walt's animators stayed with him. Bob Iwerks famously was one of them. And at the last meeting, Charles Mintz said to him, let's figure it out. Well, like we can work together. You'll work for me. I'll own the Disney studio here at Universal. We'll absorb you. We'll own you, but you still keep making your cartoons and it'll be great. And Walt, I love this part. Walt looked at him and said, don't you understand, Charlie? He said, I'm never going to look at Oswald again. He makes me sick. He said, he makes me sick. And he said, I'm leaving and that's it. And I'll figure it out. And then he vowed never to work for anyone ever again. And he never did. And my favorite part about the story is on the way out, he told Charles Mintz, he said, Charlie, you take care of yourself. He said, because the people, meaning the animators and Universal, the people that did this to me, they're going to do it to you. And he was right. Like just a few months later, Oswald was taken from Charles Mintz and given to Walter Lantz. Walter Lantz ended up making Woody Woodpecker
Yeah.
eventually, and Oswald, he flopped after that. Like not flopped, but he didn't
Yeah.
have he didn't have the Disney studio and Walt coming up with the stories. Like that's what made Mickey so popular. Was Walt was the story guy. Walt was the gag guy. Walt came up with, Walt Mickey Mouse was Walt's alter ego. That's like when I talked to Floyd Norman, Floyd said like it's funny. Like you just watch Mickey and you go, oh, that's Walt. It's just what Walt couldn't do in the early days was what Mickey did. And then Walt provided the voice, of course. So Walt was Mickey Mouse's voice for the first, I don't know,
Oh,
15 years. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So oh boy, that's all Walt in the early days.
Oh my goodness. He was really a performer.
So that's the thing, right? Is he was, and there's the famous, I'm so sorry. I'm just like, I'll tell you the stories. And none of these are in the book. I don't think any of these are in the book. I'm like, all the stories. But this story I did tell in the book, and it's when he acted everything out, and he would, if you couldn't understand. No, actually, this story isn't in the book. There was a story guy that was very nervous about going to his meeting with Walt. He had only been there a few months, and he had to draw a Pluto sequence where Pluto wakes up in the morning after sleeping all night. And he had the drawings, he had the sketches and the storyboards, and he takes it to Walt's office, and Walt's there, and he
Mhm.
sits down, and he's explaining it. He's taking it through the storyboard, and he's saying, "Here he is waking up, and this and that," and he looks over at Walt, and Walt's eyes are closed, and his mouth is all, and his mouth is like wrinkled, and he starts making his lip smacking noises, like, and then the poor, the poor animators looking at him like, "This guy's freaking what's crazy? What's he doing?"
Yeah.
And then he looks at him and Walt goes, "You know how that feeling when you wake up and you can't taste anything and your eyes aren't adjusted?" And he just acted out the whole Pluto thing. And he said, "Why can't Pluto wake up like that?" And Pluto, that's how he drew it. Pluto woke up like that. Walt was very famous for that. Like he would literally act out the character's facial expressions. Very famously, he had the left eyebrow is very famous that it would go up when he was
Uh-huh.
annoyed. Like whenever he was annoyed at what somebody was saying, he would give him the one eyebrow up. And then his other famous one was Floyd Norman told me that when he was his finger tapping. So when he would tap his finger slowly,
Uh-huh.
it just he was interested in what you were saying. Go ahead.
Uh-huh.
And then when he would sit back in his chair and tap fast, it meant get to your point quickly or shut up because he's losing his patience and you're not. Yeah. So anyway, that was that. Those are kind of random, but that's not a.
He
Those were not answering your questions. I am so
he has the
sorry.
strong nonverbals.
Yeah, you didn't have to guess much with him. I don't think. I mean, from
Mhm.
whatever everybody told me, he yeah, you got the picture when you saw.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So, Mickey Mouse was not originally Mickey Mouse. He was Mortimer.
that's
And
right.
can you tell us about how that name change got
Yeah,
changed?
so as I said earlier, Charles Mintz stole or took Oswald from Walt,
Mhm.
and Walt didn't want to tell his brother Roy what had happened. He didn't want to give him bad news, via telegram or anything. So he sent a telegram from New York, and he said, leaving tonight, stopping over in Kansas City. All is fine. Talk when I get back. It was simple as that. And on the train from Kansas City to California after the New York leg, Walt was coming up with a story. He was coming up with a new story for a new character. Uh, and so famously, the story that Walt told was for years, Walt told the story that he came up with the mouse on that train ride and his wife, and he came up with the story and he came up with the concept for a mouse. And he said, "How about this,
Mhm.
Lily?" To his wife Lillian, I have a what I have a this mouse, and he said, "Here's the mouse that I have, and we're going to call him Mortimer Mouse." And she said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I don't like that." And he was like, "Why not? What's wrong with Mortimer?" And she said, "Nah, it's stuffy. I don't like it." And she said, "How about Mickey?" And that's apparently the legend is how that's the story he told. Now, I here's where it gets fun. And this is a really
Okay.
fun part of the story. I years ago when I first started doing the podcast, a woman reached out to me who had the last name of Iworks. And of course, it's not a very common last name, but
Mhm.
I have a lot of people who have Disney who make their last names Disney last names because they're fans. I have a lot of Chris Disney, Mike Disney, Billie Jean Disney followers on
Wow.
Facebook. Right? So I didn't think anything of it, but once in a while she would send me a message correcting some of my stories, and I was like, oh, maybe she is an Iworks. Turns out she's Ub Iworks' granddaughter, and
Wow.
um, she told me, and this is the story that her grandfather and her family tells, is that Walt got off the train wanting a new character, having a story for Plane Crazy, having the story where some farm animal would drive a plane. He had all the gags worked out. He was thinking of it all, but he didn't have an animal. He had no idea. And
Mhm.
Roy picked them up from the train station with Lillian, and they actually lived next door to each other on Lyric Avenue in Los Angeles. So
Mhm.
Roy drove to their houses and they sat down and the rumor is they cracked a couple of beers and they invited Ub Iwerks over and they were drinking beer and they were drawing characters. And Ub came up with I think 6 or 7 different animals and presented them to Walt. And Walt said, "I'd like the mouse." And that's when Lillian came up with Mortimer. That's when
Mhm.
when Lillian came up with Mickey in that
Mhm.
form. Who knows which one it was? The
Yeah.
story is Lillian did come up with Mickey over Mortimer, and yeah, and Ub Iwerks most certainly drew the first versions. I mean, I've seen them. If you go to the Walt Disney Family Museum, you can see the first ever drawings of Mickey Mouse. Like literally, they're in behind glass, right? Like you can
Mhm.
put your phone right. I took a picture. That's why I mastered the put your phone against the glass museum picture taking strategy. I realized you put your phone right up against the glass. There's no glare, and nobody stopped me from doing this. So I did it 850 times at the Walt Disney Family Museum, and I thought the security was going to kick me out, but they didn't. They were very nice, and I got to, So, but yeah, anyway, I'm sorry. I keep rambling and rambling.
No, no, but Mortimer has he's, Mickey's arch enemy, right?
Yeah.
Or is that
So
what it was?
they brought him back later on as one of Mickey's foils. Yeah, it's like, and then especially if you watch like that Mickey Mouse Clubhouse or Mickey Mouse Roast the Racers, Mickey and the Roast the
Mhm.
Racers. He does the ha cha cha. He does that weird like he has like the big he looks like Walt like Mortimer. The Mortimer character looks like evil Walt Disney. Like he has a big mustache and yeah, and the eyebrows. It's funny. It's very different. But
That's
yeah.
funny. Alright, so let's talk about okay, before we get to the parks, because I definitely wanna talk about the parks, but
Mhm.
there's a famous story about, creating the first full-length animated movie, which was Snow White.
Yeah. You're talking about the light bulb hanging on the studio kind of story and that one?
I guess so. It was the one where Walt was acting out the story
Yeah, so that's
to
right. Yeah, yeah.
okay.
So yeah, it was I think it was 1934 maybe. Walt had been trying out. He had seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on screen, the silent version when he was very young. I don't know
Mhm,
how old it was. I think it was 12, 13. Um, so he had wanted to do that movie. He was infatuated with it, and he had been working on the storyline in his head, just telling people the plot of the movie of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He had been working on it for months and months, telling people the story, and then they were like, I don't like that part. So he would change it and then tell them this part, and they were like, So like he was working on it, refining it, changing the story, changing the story. I think it was a Friday, almost at the end of the workday, he walked into his animators, one of the big offices, and said, "Listen." He took all the key animators that work for him and said, an artist, and said, go across the street to the restaurant there. I don't know the restaurant name. Have dinner on me. He gave them money. Then come back. I have something to show you. So they did. They
mhm,
all went. It's 1930s. They're all drinking. They come back. There's Walt at on in the studio lit by one bulb, and he has all seats around him, and he has this have a seat, and he proceeds and to act out all of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Literally every part. He's Snow White. He's the witch. He would throw a blanket over his head and be the evil queen.
uh,
He would poison himself with the apple and fall down. He was all the dwarfs. He did all the voices. He did everything. People were crying. Literally, people were crying during that. Like he performed the entire story. And at the end of it, he said, "This is our first full length animated feature." And they were hooked. Like everybody was there was like, yeah, yeah, yep,
mhm.
yeah, this is a winner. There's no way it's not. There's no way it's not. And they dedicated their lives like a studio full of men and women, no overtime, but working all the overtime. He didn't pay overtime. They didn't have it. They had no
Yeah,
money. Some days he was giving out cash on the baseball diamond across the street for people who needed to pay bills because they didn't have it to pay him. But people were like,
uh-huh.
we trust you, Walt. We trust you. We think it's going to work. Same thing happened with Disneyland. Same thing. Nobody wanted his brother Roy was like, no one's gonna pay. No one wants this park. So he started telling everybody about it, just dropping hints to everybody. It's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to work. Finally, he had so much support around his studio. Hazel George, his nurse, she started this thing called the Disneyland Backers Club.
Uh-huh.
And they had dozens of people giving their own money, giving their, like, here, Walt, take my money. I don't want this paycheck. Take it. Giving it for the construction of Disneyland so he can get it done. They did the same thing with Snow White. They gave their own money out of their pocket. Like, what other boss? I don't care. What other boss in the world have you heard of who people gave their own money to? We're like, no, you keep my paycheck this week. I want it. Go to the project. That doesn't happen. So
Yeah.
that's a special person that gets people to do that. Like it is. Like I don't know, man. If we all aspire a little bit to be like that, like holy cow, we that's what I mean. I try to, except like
Yeah.
the holy cow stuff, like that right there, the holy cow, that's an act. Like I curse my face off, but not around my kid and not inappropriately. But when if I'm on camera, I can do it. I can throw like oh goshes and the holy molies. But when I tell my wife when I found my book at like under 10,000, like ranked under 10,000 today,
Uh-huh.
that wasn't a holy moly. There was a couple expletives thrown out there. I was jumping up and down like under 10. It's crazy to me. So it's wild. So I really thank you for having me on again because like I just want people to know about it. And it's like I said, it's the person that gave me the ultimate compliment at Disneyland, the feeling like Disneyland, like man, that's like a drug I could get used to. Keep those coming.
Yeah.
Keep awesome.
Okay, so let's move on to the parks. How did the dream come about Disneyland?
He had so in the 30s, there were the first drawings that were done by Marvin Davis. I believe it
Mhm,
was the late 30s for a Mickey Mouse park, which was going to be
mhm,
across the studio in Burbank on a little lot that the studio owned. And it was I forget how many acres it was, but it just didn't it wasn't big enough. Uh, After a few years, Walt his imagination had outgrown that spot. It really goes back to, and it's the famous thing that Walt said in an interview in the '60s. It goes back to his daddy's day with his daughters when they were very little. I forget it was Saturdays or Sundays. I think it was Saturdays or daddy's days. Maybe it was Sundays. I forget. And he would take them one day on the weekend it was the day he would take them to the Griffith Park Zoo. They would go, to the aquarium. They would go horseback riding. They would go whatever. And he would take them to the studio. They learned to ride their bikes at the studio.
mhm,
And one of the places he would take them is Griffith Park playground. Carousel.
mhm,
And he would put them on a carousel, but adults weren't able to ride it. And he would get peanuts from a nearby vendor and sit and like shell the peanuts and eat them on one of those famous green benches while his daughters rode the carousel. And that's the famous story. It was from there. He said, "I wish there was a place where adults and children could go out and have fun together."
mm.
That was the genesis. That's like the thought, like, oh, like Disney, like that's where it kind of came from. Um,
So were there not amusement parks before that?
so okay, we're gonna get technical here.
Okay.
They're theme parks, right? So Disneyland, Walt Disney World theme parks. There were amusement parks. Coney Island existed well before that.
Mhm,
Knott's Berry Farm in California, right down the road, was there, had a Western town. Walt borrowed some of his theming ideas from Knott's Berry Farm. He was
mhm,
friends with Walter Knott and his wife. Walter Knott helped advise him on Disneyland. He eventually helped Walter Knott. He advised Walter Knott on Knott's Berry Farm. So Disneyland was the first theme park. I think it's widely known as the first theme park.
mhm,
But no, not amusement park. They were all over the Jersey Shore in New York and the California coastline, and they were all over the place. But
mhm,
he was the first one that was like, let's make you feel like you're in a movie, no matter where you are in the park. Like let's put you in a
mhm,
spot. He was the first guy to do that.
mhm. Okay. Okay, so Disneyland came first. When did Disney World come about?
So they broke ground in 66 when Walt was still alive.
Okay.
And then it didn't open until 1971. And of course, it opened with Magic Kingdom only as far as the park, and then
Mhm,
it opened with the Polynesian, and then Fort Wilderness and the Contemporary. So that was 71. Epcot is I always forget 82. I think it's 82. Animal Kingdom
mhm.
98. I mean Hollywood Studios 89. Animal Kingdom 98. Disney California Adventure. Uh, my my friend's gonna be I have a friend who's a who is like one of the top guys out there, and he's gonna hear me say that and go, "Oh, you son of a!" I have no idea what year that park opened. I do know that my wife and I went on our honeymoon in 2008, and we saw the original Disney California Adventure, and I was very confused by that park. And before the renovation,
Uh-huh.
it was a park in California that celebrated California, which is very strange because
Huh.
everybody who goes there is from California. So why
Uh-huh.
would they go to those places instead of those pretend places that were in the park? Like, we had a pretend like Sunset Strip ride. Well, you go to the Sunset Strip. It's right there. So you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it didn't work. So they renovated it. They refurbished it, and now it's a wonderful park. They have Cars Land and Avengers Campus, and
Uh-huh.
I love it. I love it there now. I spend a ton of time out there now, but before then it was really weird. It was a very strange park. You know,
It's so that one was more recently built, the one attached to Disneyland. What
that's
did
right.
you call it?
Disney California Adventure. They
Okay.
chopped off the apostrophe S from Disney's a bunch of years ago. Now it's just Disney California Adventure. Don't ask me why that one either. That makes it
Mm.
difficult to say if you ask me. But I don't work for Disney anymore.
Well, when I was a cast member back in the early 2000s, I they kept talking, and maybe this was just entirely folklore, about uh opening a villains park. Do you know if that was ever actually a thing
it's
that they were considering?
it's been the rumor forever, forever, forever. It I every time I see it now, like I see it in like one of those websites, the blogs, it's like you just roll your eyes. It's been rumored again. They're expanding Magic or it's called Beyond Big Thunder Mountain. They're expanding Magic Kingdom in the coming years. That area that's back behind Big Thunder is a parking lot and stuff. Now they're going to gut all that and make that a new land. And the rumor was that maybe there would be villains in that land, but
Uh-huh.
it looks like probably not. I don't know what they're going to put there, but Animal Kingdom is getting an Indiana Jones area and an attraction and a attraction based on was it Coco? Not Coco. What the heck is the
The
Encanto?
gorilla?
No,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Encanto.
Encanto.
Okay.
No, Coco. That's a great. That's actually a great guess because the Animal Kingdom and all, but Coco, the attraction is not
Uh-huh.
what I was trying to say. Encanto. It's like a big house. So there's an attraction in Paris, Disneyland Paris called Mystic Manor, and the rumor is they're going to make like a Mystic Manor version in for Animal Kingdom, but it's going to be Encanto themed. So we'll see. Again, I've never
Okay.
been to Paris because get me on a boat. I don't want to go on a plane right now. We had my daughter. I was just in Disneyland a week and a half ago. My daughter's 13. It was our first dad daughter trip ever. She's on the spectrum. She has high functioning autism,
Mhm.
and it was a rough it's a rough plane ride home. So now I'm like, where can we drive to? I don't like flying anyway, but like, it's
Yeah.
tough. But
I remember another rumor that I'd heard while I was there, was this was after Walt had died, and obviously since he died before I was born, um, but that at some point there was some dissatisfaction with some Imagineers. At, they're the engineers who are at Disney. For those who are not in the know of the Disney lingo, um, that they like up and quit at Disney and they moved to Universal and they brought their dueling dragons ride that is so famous at Universal. Did you ever hear that
yeah,
rumor or know
that
if
was,
that was true?
yeah, that was absolutely true. That was supposed to be an attraction that went into Beastly Kingdom at Animal Kingdom.
Uh-huh.
If you look at the Animal Kingdom logo, you'll see a dragon on it. Still, there was a post. It was originally supposed to have mythical animals. Now, I guess now they do have mythical animals in Pandora. They have like Pandora, the world of Avatar. So they have like the Navi and all that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, the dragon was on the logo represented Beastly Kingdom, and they were going to have a dragon roller coaster there, and that's what they designed as for Dueling Dragons. I don't know the whole backstory, but for sure they did leave in a disgruntled fashion and took their idea to Universal, who built Dueling Dragons, which was one. It was a great coaster, but man, I'll never forget that beat you up. That was it's gone now. They replaced it. They put it. It's now where one of the Harry Potter lands stands now.
Oh.
Um, but man, it used to beat you up pretty good. So they yeah, it was a tough one.
But it was a really popular ride. That's surprising that they took it down.
It was, yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just one of the rethemes. I know they rethemed it for a while where it was like I'm pretty sure it was like the dragon. No, it's going now. It was the dragon like quest. Like there was like some kind of tournament through Quidditch, and it was
Oh.
rethemed it to that for a while, and
Uh-huh.
then they now it's where one of the Harry Potter land stands. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm wrong, but Universal will get mad at me because I used to work there as well. Well, hopefully nobody from commercials listen to this. My business, my agency, we book trips all over the world. So like we specialize in Disney vacations, but we book Universal, every cruise line, Walt Disney World, Land, Adventures by Disney, Disney Cruise Line, all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
So you won't get that man. I gave him a plug.
Well, and a lot of people who go to Disney will also spend a day or two at Universal.
Yeah. We've done it. My kids, we did that with my kids last year for the first time because they're 11, they were 12. I'm sorry, 12 and 10. So they were able to ride all the thrill rides. So we rode my wife's chicken, so she didn't ride any of them. And I was 44. And listen, the older you get, those roller coasters are upside down, man. You're like, all right, I'll ride it once, and then I think I'm done. Like I used to, when I was in my 20s, I could ride that all day. Now I'm like, I'm on blood pressure medication. Like, I don't think I want to be doing that. So my dad will be 70. He's 69, and he tried to hang on. And last summer he rode a roller coaster. I looked at him and I go, "Yo, dude, you got it. That's it for you." I was like, "You're gonna have a heart attack on one of these things." Like, I am nervous. You're nearly 70 years old. Stop. Go on Small World and Peter Pan's Flight and be happy to go with your grandchildren. That should be that, you know?
Yeah. Well, do you have any favorite stories of the ones that you wrote in your book, or even some that you left out? Do you have
So I'm writing book number 2 now, so I don't want to give those away.
Okay.
That's that. Yeah, like I want to make it a little bit bigger and a little bit better than the first one, and then yeah, I don't want to tell those. I'll tell you, the Walt being doubted stories are my favorite. The ones where there's this one where he, whenever somebody says to him, you can't do that. Like, nah, Walt, that can't be done. Like, we're not. I love that he goes, oh yeah, really, can't be done. All right, and he just did it. That's my favorite. My favorite thing is that he did have a lot of the chip on his shoulder, where if you told him he couldn't do something, he'd love to prove you wrong, and he would make sure he proved you wrong, and then he would tell you about it. But one of my favorite stories. Here's one. What's your rating on this podcast? Can I drop a curse? Can you beep it out?
Yeah, I can make it explicit.
Okay, you can but feel free to beep it. But it is the punchline of the
Okay.
of the story. So I forget the name of the animator who was trying to be trying to be an Imagineer and was trying to get Walt's attention. And this is in I think the late 50s, early 60s. And he would keep coming by to Walt's office and say, "Walt, you have a couple minutes. I want to show you something. I made this model. I made this thing. I want to show you. It's a kinetic model. I want you to see it work." And Walt kept blowing it off. Like, I'll see it. I'm busy. I'll see it. So Walt had a office suite where he had actually 3 offices in one. So he had this Imagineer talk to Walt's secretary, and she let him into one of Walt's offices, and he set up this machine while Walt wasn't there. And he waited. And Walt comes in from a meeting, and this Imagineer, uninvited, is standing there with his machine set up. And he says, "Walt, I've been trying to show you this for a week. Can I show it to you?" And Walt's annoyed, and he's fine. Show it. God. So he shows it to him, and it moves, and it does everything it's supposed to. It's very intricate. It's very cool. And it's like, yeah, this should get him a great Imagineering spot. And Walt looks at it and looks back at the guy and just stares at him. And the Imagineer goes, but for the effort, Walt, I mean, give me an E for effort here. And Walt goes, "I'll give you an S for shit." That's it. That's the whole story. And I just love that because he's like, you know what? Like, my time's valuable here, buddy. And you're going to I just love it. Like, you have the appropriate time to come to your boss with that. He was telling you that, but you tried to force his hand, and then you're done. You're not, now you tried to force his hand. So now you don't get anything. And,
Yeah.
the guy in later years ended up actually becoming, he was one of Walt's top guys, and he ended up telling that story and laughing his face off every time he told it. Like, that was his story. And I read it in Marty Sklar's book, and I love it. And I forget one thing that I mentioned too. Like, I love now that I got a little bit of people follow me on Facebook, and so when I mess up a story now, in the beginning I can mess up stories. It was fine. Nobody cared. Nobody called me on it. Now if I mess up a story, I hear from actual Disney legends, and they're like, "Hey."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, yeah." Like this guy, Tom Morris, he helped design Big Thunder Mountain. They designed Sleeping Beauty Castle in Disneyland. He's a former Imagineer, a really big deal. You say Tom Morris around Disneyland, everyone's like, "Oh my God, Tom Morris." I told a story, and not even in the DMs. I told a story on Facebook, and he
Uh-huh.
commented on it and corrected half of it. And I was like, "Oh no." So I like quickly, the first thing I did, like I'm like in the middle of dinner and I'm jumping on my phone and I'm like fixing the story. But the fact that he would go out of his way to make sure I got it right, like
Yeah.
that is cool. It's so neat. So I'm so lucky, like to be able to do that and to meet the people I've met and talk to the people I've talked to, and for this book to come of it, and to be able to do this and talk to you and you're laughing at these stories, like it's awesome. So thank you. This is the dream come true. It really is. It really is. And I'm so lucky to be able to do this. I really am.
What are your thoughts about yes, I agree. Uh, on everything. What are your thoughts on how I feel like a lot of the fairy tales that um I grew up with were because of Disney. Like
Mhm.
I wasn't read the Grimm's fairy tales books. I had a few fairy tales told to me, I think, as a child, but we now look to Disney for the fairy tale stories, and some of them they take liberties, right? They're not like necessarily true to the original.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about how the fairy tales were taken and now are almost standardized because of Disney?
They're Disneyfied, right? Let's call them like Disneyfied. They
Yeah,
Disneyfied.
yeah,
Um, there's a the, I so a lot of that stuff. So like a lot of the Grimm brothers and all that stuff is pretty dark, pretty
yeah.
inappropriate for kids, like cutting off pieces of your foot, of your foot. And I didn't know all that stuff. My kids are act, all of them act. My wife wasn't. My wife is a huge Broadway fan. All my kids, all three of them are like they love the stage.
Uh-huh.
So I went. We saw what's that one? Into the Woods.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
my wife's explaining to me Into the Woods, and she's like, "This is the real story of the Grimm this, and Cinderella had to cut her foot off, her stepsister had to cut her foot off the fit." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, thank goodness they changed these darn things. Like, I don't know. Like, we have some dark, dark mythology. Maybe hold off
Mhm.
until our kids are like 14 to teach it to them, and maybe the Disney versions aren't so bad. There's a funny story that goes with that when Bill Pete, who was Walt's best story guy, like in the 30s, 40s, 50s. He was Walt 60s. He was Walt Disney's number one story guy. He was the guy that came up with all the ideas for the story, drew the storyboards, like what the scene would look like. Bill Pete came up with all of them.
Mhm.
They had to do the Jungle Book, and Rudyard Kipling had written a Jungle Book, and
Mhm.
Walt put Bill Pete, who was his best story guy, on the Jungle Book, and was like, come up with how this movie, how this looks, how this feels, come up with the storyboards for this. So I don't know how long he had. He had weeks, and then Walt comes in and sees the storyboards, and Bill Pete hadn't Disneyfied it. He made it look the way Rudyard Kipling's book felt.
Uh-huh.
And took one look at it and goes, I can't make this movie." And he's like, "But Walt, this is what the book is." And he's like, "I understand, but we're making Walt Disney's The Jungle Book. We're not making Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
sold us the rights to this book. I'm gonna make it the way I wanna make it." And
Mhm.
he took Bill Pete off of it, and Bill Pete was so mad that he quit, and he was his number one guy for decades, and he was so mad that he quit. But Walt made the movie he wanted to make, right? So he's unflinching, very unflinching when
Mhm.
it came to that stuff. Like it was his way or the highway. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think Disney could get back to telling some fairy tales now, and I think us parents will be thrilled. Tell me a
Yeah.
fairy tale. I listen. We went to see Wish. It was fine. It was fine. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was weird. It was disjointed. I love Disney. I wish they would bring they just need to bring some story. I don't know where the story people went, but that's what
Uh-huh.
we need storytellers. You need a storyteller, somebody who can write a good story from beginning to end and surprise people and make them laugh and cry. Where are they? That's what Disney needs.
Do you know if Encanto is based off of a fairy tale or a folk legend?
Caught me on that one. I have no idea.
That'd be interesting to find out.
It would be.
Because it has the feel of something from like
Yeah.
because where does it take place?
I'm pretty sure that was written by the same people who wrote Frozen. I'm almost
Okay.
now that I'm thinking about it. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
it's like a but they both based Frozen on the Hans Christian Andersen uh, novels. So if you look at
Okay.
the main characters from Frozen, get this: Hans,
Uh-huh.
Kristoff, Anna, Sven. Hans,
Mhm.
Kristoff, Hans Christian Andersen. Hans, Kristoff, Anna, Sven. So they it's literally the Ice Princess, but they named it
Oh,
Frozen.
uh-huh.
Just made it Disney, and they do it
Yeah.
with everything. Rapunzel,
Disneyfied.
Tangled, yeah. And my kid grew up on it, and I'll tell you what, I grew up on it. And the first Disney movie I remember seeing was Pinocchio. My grandfather took me. It was a release in the 80s. Like, I don't know, it was 83 maybe.
Uh-huh.
I remember seeing it. I mean, I'm like, yep, these are the greatest movies ever. So I'm fine. My feeling is I'm fine. I'm good with I'll rehash every fairy tale as long as they're good stories that make my kids happy. I don't care. And me.
Mhm.
And me.
Yeah. Well, we're getting towards the end. What have we missed? What have we not talked about that we need to talk about?
Um, I don't. I think we covered a lot. I think we covered it all. Just yeah. I mean, I'm trying to like Walt like Disneyland. We didn't do a whole lot of Disneyland stories. Disneyland is where that's like the second half of the book. And
Uh-huh.
it's, but I think I mean, a lot of it is his life, Walt's life. It's really a book about Walt's life, and I think we
Mhm.
covered a lot of that on the talk. And I'm really I'm pretty comfortable. I think I gave people a lot of nuggets. Hopefully, it's enough. I just want you to know. That's really the goal of it, is to know who Walt Disney is and what or was, and I say is, that's kind of creepy. Who Walt Disney was, and instead of thinking he's like the guy, instead of thinking he's Betty Crocker and he's just like a fictional character that is the name on a box. Because my kids' friends, when I asked them about this last year, I was like, "Was Walt Disney a real person?" They were like, "No." It's like, oh my god, I gotta write a book. They're like, wait, he was real? He lived? And I'm like, holy right, really? So my kid knew, of course, but these kids didn't. So I was like, we gotta fix this. America's youth is needs to know that he was a real person. So yeah, but anyway, I think we covered it all. And yeah.
Well, I do have one last question.
Yeah.
I thought about while you were talking, because you mentioned Roy, and Roy was, a very strong supporting character in Walt's life. How strong of would Walt Disney World or Land or any of these projects, would they have come to fruition? Do you think without Roy, was he instrumental?
You as as almost as instrumental as Walt. I think Roy said Roy never would take that credit when he was alive. Uh he
Hmm.
was Walt was terrible with money, terrible with finances. As I said earlier, the Kansas City deal, he didn't make profit. He just covered, all he did was cover, like he covered costs and that was it. So he made all those films he lost money on. He needed somebody to
Hmm.
teach him. And Roy was a banker. Roy had been in the military and was a banker in Los Angeles when Walt really broke into show business. And when Walt got his first contract from MJ Winkler to make Alice comedies, he got on the public transportation. I think it was a trolley and then a bus, took
Hmm.
it to the Veterans Hospital where Roy was living in a screened, get this, because Roy was recovering from tuberculosis, was in a
Hmm.
screened in patio hospital wing. Imagine that. Like all these people with TB in a big screened in patio. And
Hmm.
Walt comes in it after visiting hours with a check, and he tells Roy, check it, like, look at this. Like, this is a check for $15,000 or whatever it was, 50, however many much it was. I think it was 15,000 for the first one, and he was like, I have thousands of dollars here, and he said, I want to go into business making these cartoons for MJ Winkler, and he said, I need a partner. I can't do it by myself. And
Hmm.
Roy said, as the story goes, Roy said, "Well, have you figured it out? Like, have you figured out your costs? Have you figured out what your profit will be? Have you figured out your schedule? Have you figured all this out?" And Walt had, on his drive over, had written it all down and figured all the numbers and what it would cost. And finally, and he presented that to Roy, and Roy looked at it and said, "All right, I'll help you." And the next morning, when Roy saw his doctor, the doctor gave him a clean bill of health, and Roy said, "Can I leave?" And he said, "Yes." And that day, Walt signed a contract. I think it's October, I can't remember the date, 1923. Signed a contract with MJ Winkler, um, that started the Disney Brothers studio, and that was the first real and he was by his side for everything. I mean, Roy was the one that raised the money to get everything done. Roy was one of my favorite things is like when they were trying to get movies made in the 40s and 50s. There's no money. It's during World War II in the 40s, and Roy would come into the room, and Walt would be working at a story meeting with his guys, and he would say, "Well, Walt, we don't have money. We don't have the money for this production that you're making. All this art. We don't have the money for this, so we can't do it." And Walt would
Yeah.
go, "Get out. I'm busy. You'll figure out how to make the money. Get out." And Roy did. Like that, they had that kind of a tumultuous relationship, but they
Yeah.
loved each other. They had some fights over the years. They had some big ones. They had some big ones where they
Yeah.
didn't talk to each other for months and months and months. And then when somebody would make a mistake to Walt and go, "Hey, I saw Roy. He was angry," and Walt would go, You talk to me about my brother ever. Never." Like they were brothers and they were fighting, but don't get in between them. And
Yeah.
I love it. And Roy, when Walt passed away, Walt Disney World could have been it. But
Yeah.
Roy said, "Now we're gonna make this the way that my brother wanted it. We're gonna make this is gonna be exactly how he wanted it." And there's a funny thing, they wanted to put the theme park um right next to the exit of I-4. They were like, "Let's put Magic Kingdom there. Just in case if this
Mhm.
doesn't work out. Why would we put the theme park in the middle of the property?" He said, "Then we have to build all this infrastructure and highway to get you to the theme park." No. The executives were like, "We'll build it right off the highway." And Roy said, "No,
Mhm.
you won't. You're gonna build it right where my brother said we were gonna build it. Not only that, we're not gonna name it Disney World. It was gonna be called Disney World." And he said, "We're
Mhm.
gonna call it Walt Disney World after my brother."
Mhm.
And
Mm.
and right the sad part is I think a month after Walt Disney World opened, Roy dropped dead. 1 month after it opened, he was dead. It was all the stress, all the
Yeah.
literally he finished his brother's work. Like he finished it and that was it. Sad, but he literally was the guy that always had his brother's back, always got the money. Oh, I mean,
Mhm.
look at what Disney is now. That's all because of him. Like he
Mhm.
had to deal with every banker. He had to deal with his brother's attitude, his brother's ego. Whenever Walt was like, "Hey, I think I can make the best movie in the world. I'm going to get Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews, and I'm going to put animation in it, and it's going to be the best movie ever." And everyone was like, "All right, I guess we'll get you your money and we'll see what happens." And it ended up winning the Academy Award. So yeah,
Uh-huh.
he was instrumental in doing all of that. And Walt was never comfortable until Disneyland was a giant hit. And when Disneyland, a year after Disneyland, because he always put his money back into his work. Like
Mhm.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the biggest hit in the world, and he could have stayed in the Hyperion studio on
Yeah.
Hyperion Avenue in Los Angeles. But instead, he put all his money into building a new studio. I was like, "I'm gonna make it bigger and better." And just, the guy just never stopped, and Roy was always there, giving him the money every step of the way. So, yeah, it's a very, very, very long winded way to answer your question, but yeah, Roy was as instrumental, I think, as Walt was for sure.
But it's important to note because we see these like leaders like Walt Disney and we see, we hear their legends, but there are so many people that are around them that help to support
Mhm.
and make it possible for them to make their dreams a reality. And
Yeah,
I think that it's so important to remember that there's a lot of other people that were important uh, to making these legendary people that we know about and hear about.
yeah. I mean,
um
you have Walt's. I mean, this is Walt's family, like his wife Lillian, his daughters, his brothers. Like I didn't even mention his sister Ruth or his parents, and I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but yeah, there's a million people behind that, and a million people who worked at the Disney studio, like Hazel George um and Tommy, I forget her last name, Walt's secretary, and all these other people who literally were there every single day, and who were the people
mhm,
who were helping Walt do these insane things every single day, like really
mhm,
crazy, crazy things. Like he changed, like to say he changed the world, I think is a bit of an understatement. I mean, we have he invented animation basically, um, invented a theme park, invented a different way to make movies. Storyboards were created at the Disney studio by one of the Disney artists. Like just the multiplane camera, like a million things came out of that studio
mhm.
um, every day, just something new. And that must have been a cool place to work. I've been there. I've walked around the halls, and it's you. A couple places in I've been, you feel Walt Disney's presence. That's one, and the other
Mhm.
one is above the firehouse. His apartment in Disneyland above the firehouse is when you're in there, you just go, whoa, like you're like, whoa, I feel funny. It feels funny in there. It's weird. Like, I don't know if you believe in ghosts. I believe in something. I definitely believe in an afterlife. I
Uh-huh.
was Catholic, 12 years of Catholic school. I believe in that. And when I'm in that room, I'm like, oof. It doesn't feel cold, but it's a little like, whoa, feels funny in
Yeah.
here. Like that. I think if there's anywhere where Walt's spirit is, it's there. It's in that room.
So do they allow tours of that apartment now?
They do. Yeah. You have, there's, I forget the name of the tour. But there is a Disneyland tour now that you can sign up with a VIP tour guide, and it's on the
Mm.
Disneyland website, or you can contact me, Phil Gramlick, Phil, you're We'll help you. Uh, and yeah, there is a tour, and you go. It's a part of it is you walk into the apartment with your tour guide. We amazingly, when I took my agents a couple of years ago, I didn't know this. My friend called me and he said, "Listen, my buddy who works at Disneyland. He said, listen, I got you a guide. We're going to go in and see Walt's apartment with your agents. I had 10 agents, all women with me, right?" And he
Mhm.
goes, "Listen, I need to tell you something before we go in. The uh the VIP tour guide that is going to take you into Walt's apartment is Michael Sinatra." And I go, "Sinatra?" And he goes, "It's Frank's grandson." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm such a freaking Frank Sinatra fan." And I was like, "Oh, my grandfather raised me on Sinatra, right?" So I had to go into this, and I couldn't tell any of my agents who he was because I
Uh-huh.
couldn't tell them that he doesn't hide who he is on the internet. But
Yeah.
I couldn't tell his name, his social media name is very much in line with his grandfather. But I couldn't tell them who he was. And the whole time he's talking, I'm staring at his eyes because they're bright blue. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Rex now, just grandfather. I couldn't even hear him tell me stories about Walt. I was just like staring at him. But yeah, he's like, don't tell your agents. But when we leave, so when we left, I was like, that was Frank Sinatra's grandson. They were like, oh my God. But yeah, I think I got on his nerves that day. I think I got on Frank Sinatra's grandson's nerves because every story he told, I was like, "Yeah, I've heard that. I know that one." And he's probably like, "Phil, shut up and get out of the freaking apartment, please."
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's too
it's a
funny.
special place, and even if Frank Sinatra's grandson isn't there, it's very special.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, well, I, obviously need to make my way to Disneyland at some point.
Yes. Well, reach out, Phil.
Okay, I
My web-
will. And
my
why don't you
website,
give us that website one more time?
ear2theretravel.com. There's a request a quote form on there, and you can. Yeah, we have. You're probably not going to get me right now. I mean, you might. I probably handle your trip. But the general, if you go on there and you request a quote, you'll probably get one of my agents. I have 40 agents that work for me. We have a big team all over the country. I have an agent in one. I have actually one in London, so we're kind of multinational now.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, we have people all over the place, and yeah, go to Disneyland. You will not regret it. You need a few days, 3 or 4 days.
And
Yeah.
can people buy your book from that website, or do they have to go somewhere else?
PhilGramlick.com is where you can get my website, get the book. You can get a signed copy there. It's a PhilGramlich.com. I can
Okay.
get a signed copy or a regular off the shelf kind of copy. And then you can also order a book plate I have a lot of international people that read these stories.
Mhm.
So if you're international, it's right now it's insane to ship a book to you. Like it costs triple the cost of the book to get me. So I've been signing like little stickers um, that I send you in an envelope, and then you could stick it in your book so you have a signed copy if you're overseas. And then it's on Amazon. It's trending like whoa, it's going up every day on Amazon. So Amazon.com, you can just look for Walt and His Park. And I think it's coming to stores too. I've been trying to get it into stores. They don't tell you when you write a book. They're like, hey, everyone's like, oh, you wrote a book. Good job. Nobody tells you like once you write a book, you have a lot of stuff to do. Like you're not
Yeah.
just like the book is done. You have like you got to do you got to do podcasts, you do interviews, you have to do like junkets, you got to do like you got to do all kinds of stuff. And one of them is you try to get your book. You have to get your book in the stores. If your book sells really well, people notice it and buy it and put it in stores. If you're like
Uh-huh.
me and nobody like I have a pretty good following on social media, but not really many people know who I am. Um, you gotta ask. You gotta ask. Like, so my poor wife has had a full-time job the past week, and she's been calling bookstores. And I'm trying to get into the airports, and that's where I think if it's a 180-page book, you could read that on a long flight. So
Uh-huh.
I want to get it in all the airports, especially like Orlando, Anaheim, Los Angeles, LAX, those kinds of places. But you can
And
get it right now, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, and then my website.
And it's an easy read as well because they're bite-sized stories, so you can pick it up anywhere, and it doesn't have to necessarily go in order because each story is compact enough.
Yeah, each story is its own start. Has its own beginning, middle, and end, and you can read them. I say that in the beginning too. You can read them in any way you want. If you're in the mood for a story about the tiki room, you can look in and read it in this table of contents. Read the tiki room story. I didn't put any chapter numbers in the book on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's I say that for two reasons. One is because I want you to kind of choose your own adventure, go whichever way you want. But two is because I tried to keep it sequential, but some of the stories I don't know. Like I would talk to Bob Gurr, and he was like, "I think that was 53. Could have been 58." I'm like, all right, well, he'll put it in there. We'll see if somebody corrects me. So yeah, so that's why I didn't do chapter numbers. But yeah, you can pick up a book, and I think it's a good it's a good beach. I think that's what I wanted to be, like a good beach read or a good summer read. You're at this, for me, the Jersey Shore is a thing that I grew up with. So you're on the Jersey Shore on a deck, get a beer at 5 p.m. and put your feet up with the sun and read a book about Walt Disney. I think it's cool. I
Yeah,
tend to
it's
see
fun,
through it.
interesting, a light read. I would definitely recommend it for a summer read. Would
Thank
be
you.
a good one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please buy it. I've groveled and hocked it enough for the last hour and plus already. So
And we'll add all your links to the show notes, which is on my website, www.fabricoffolklore.com. So all those links will be available under the show notes on the website. So people will be able to find them easily and book a trip with you and read your book at the same time.
awesome. Hey, that sounds good to me. Vanessa, thank you so much for having me on. This is so much fun.
Thank
As
you,
I
Phil.
apologize to your listeners. I know I get really wordy when I tell stories. I'm sorry. It's a problem. I'm working on it. I'm trying. My podcast usually would go, I'd be like, I'm going to try for a 45-minute podcast. And like 2 hours later, my wife and I are looking at each other like, oh, we got to wrap this up. So this is how they go. Thank you again for having me. So much fun.
Well, and thank you, folksy folks, for joining us on this magical Walt Disney World journey. Like I said, the links will be on our website, the Fabric of Folklore website, and we'd love to hear from you. Whether that is, if you're watching on YouTube, you can comment in the YouTube comments. We also have a Facebook group community where we continue that conversation. It's just Fabric of Folklore group. We're also on different social medias, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So you can find us in all of those different places. I encourage you all to share with your best friend, your mom, your dad, your neighbor, your mailman, whoever you want to stop and tell about the podcast. It's so helpful for for indie podcasts like ourselves to be found. Thanks so much for unraveling the mysteries of folklore on Fabric of Folklore. And I'm Vanessa White Rogers. Until next time, keep the folklore.